Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to today's DNS session. We are going to have a discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition dated 30th September 2021. We shall take up articles important for civil service examination and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. Before we begin with today's discussion, let me just inform you and remind you. Inform you regarding the DNS revision MCQ compilation for international relation and map location. This compilation has been released today, which you can access from our ELEARN platform. Please get hold of it and revise them for the coming prelims exam. And I must remind you regarding the mains weekly answer practice that we have every Thursday. A new question has been posted under this section today. The questions that we give in the mains weekly answer practice is from DNS. The idea is to enrich your learning experience from DNS and enhance its utility. It gives you an opportunity to implement the learning that is happening through the DNS series. So please attempt the question posted under mains weekly answer practice on our eLearn platform. If you post the answer on time, your copies will be evaluated by the mentors at RAU'S IAS. This article is from page number 5. Gurjars Rajputs stake claim to Mihir Bhoj. A controversy has broken out in the state of Uttar Pradesh where Gurjars and Rajputs are competing to stake claim to the 9th century ruler of Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty. Actually, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh unveiled a statue of Mihir Bhoj. The name given to the statue was Gurjara-Pratihara Samrat, and that offended some people from the Rajput community. Their claim is that the Gurjar in Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty is name of a place rather than a community. So it does not refer to the Gurjar community in the western Uttar Pradesh. Gurjar was not a caste. The caste was Rajput. So the great Mihir Bhoj of Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty was actually Rajput. So on their protest, the name was removed. When the name was removed, it offended the Gurjars. The chief minister in his speech tried to placate both sides but didn't quite cut the ice. Our interest here would be to learn something about Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty from the exam perspective. See, after the Gupta era, Harshvardhan was the most powerful ruler. His capital was Kannauj, which was previously called as Kanyakubja. He belonged to the Pushyabhuti dynasty and the capital of Pushyabhuti dynasty was Kannauj. But the death of Harshvardhan caused political chaos and instability. There was a stiff competition among many dynasties and many kingdoms, and 3 dynasties came to prominence out of the result of this competition. There were the Gurjar-Pratihara in the western India, the Palas in the eastern India, and Rajputas in the Deccan region. All 3 dynasties wanted to have control over Kannauj. And this aspiration of controlling Kannauj became the cause of tripartite struggle. This tripartite struggle has been accounted for very well in the work of the foreign traveler Al-Masudi. He writes that the tripartite struggle, and especially the enmity between the 2 powerful kingdoms, Rajputas and Pratihara, was characteristic feature of the epoch. It continued for 300 years. For what? For Kannauj. The significance of Kannauj at that point in time was very high. First of all, it was the capital of Harshvardhan. So it was a symbol of sovereignty of North India. The status that latter Delhi will gain, the same was with Kannauj. Control of Kannauj would also ensure for any kingdom control of Upper Gangetic Valley, the resource-rich region, which also had multiple trade routes. So the strategic and commercial importance of Kannauj was very, very high. Out of these 3 kingdoms, although Rajputas were the most powerful, but Kannauj saw many rulers and many dynasties, from Rajputas and Pratihars. Naga Bhatta II of Pratihar ruler firmly made Kannauj his capital, and after that the Gurjar-Pratihara dynasty ruled there for 3 centuries. This is the rough sketch of area of influence of Gurjar-Pratihara dynasty, Rajputas and Palas, although the region of various dynasties used to change very rapidly. The Gurjar-Pratihara dynasty was founded by Harichandra, but initially Gurjar-Pratihara dynasty didn't have Kannauj as its capital. They started to rule from Ujjain. So Harichandra was the founder and he started to rule from Ujjain. During his time, the expanse of Gurjara-Pratihara was not very vast. But the expanse of the kingdom became significant at the time of Nagabhatta I, and he is the first significant king of the dynasty. One of the important things that you must know for your exam regarding Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty, they played extremely important role in checking the expanding Arab influence. They checked the influence of Arab rulers to the east of Indus. It was Vatsa Raja of Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty who for the first time established Kannauj as capital of dynasty. He had the expansionist policy which brought him into conflict with Dharmapala, the ruler of Pala dynasty, and Dhruv, the ruler of Rajput dynasty. During his time, there grew extreme enmity among these three kingdoms, and this tripartite struggle from here became very intense. Vatsa Raja defeated the Pala ruler Dharmapala and the Rashtrakuta ruler Danti Durga, but he got defeated by the Rashtrakuta ruler Dhruv. So Kannauj kept exchanging hands among the rulers of different dynasties. Nagabhatta was also one of the greatest ruler of the Pratihara dynasty. He increased the expanse of the Pratihara dynasty in the Indo-Gangetic plain by taking away the regions from Pala rulers. He also built a Shiv temple in Somnath in Gujarat. But the greatest of all the rulers was Bhoj I, or Mihir Bhoj. Since the king has been making news, you must know the time period in which he was ruling. He was the son of the great ruler Nagabhatta II, but he wasn't the father of great rulers. Mihir Bhoj ruled for nearly 50 years, 47-48 years. He expanded the kingdom of Pratihara dynasty extensively, from Multan to Bengal, from Kashmir to the northern portion of Maharashtra. He firmly established Kannauj as the capital of Pratihara dynasty. He also built the city Bhojpal, which now is called as Bhopal. He was devotee of Lord Vishnu and he took titles like Varaha. For your prelims examination, you must know that in Gwalior Prashasti inscription, the achievements of Mihir Bhoj has been mentioned. The achievements of Mihir Bhoj also has been mentioned in Raj Tarangini, the classical work of Kana. After Mihir Bhoj, the Pratihara dynasty did not see strong rulers. And around 1915-1918, Indra III, a Rashtrakuta ruler, he attacked Kannauj. And from here, the weakening of Pratihara dynasty began. There were rulers like Mahendrapal and Mahipal, but they could not just keep things together and maintain the stature that Bhojpal I brought to the Pratihara dynasty. The architecture, the art of Pratihara dynasty is very important. You must already know that temple architecture began in Gupta period, but the boost to temple architecture came in 7th, 8th century, and it got big boost by the Pratihara dynasty. It is the architecture of the Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty based on which came about Nagara style of temple architecture in northern India. In the temple architecture, they started sculptures, the tradition of intricately carved panels, and one of the important characteristics, open pavilion-style temple architecture. The Gurjar-Pratihara rulers started building temples on raised stone platform. They began the tradition of Shikhara. They used the commonly available sandstone in the region. The sandstone that they used had shades of red because of rusting. Their style became very popular in northern India, and their style culminated into development of Nagara style of temple architecture. One of the greatest examples of Gurjar-Pratihara architecture are temples at Khajuraho. Temples at Khajuraho, mind you, were not built directly by the Gurjar-Pratihara dynasty. It was built by Chandela dynasty. But Chandelas were vassals of Pratihars, and they adopted the same architecture as Pratihars. So Khajuraho has Gurjar-Pratihara architecture style. And in the 2 centuries of Gurjar-Pratihara rule at Kannauj, Kannauj became the greatest center of art. Not only of art, but also of commerce. For your prelims examination, you must note the name of Sanskrit poet and dramatist Rajshekhara. Rajshekhar was associated with Mahendrapal and Mahipal. The administrations set up in India were elaborately developed during the time of Mauryas. But the administration in medieval period were mostly based on the administrative structure of Guptas and the ideas of Harshvardhan. So broadly, the Gurjar-Pratihara dynasty followed quite the same administrative structure as that were followed by Guptas and Harshvardhan. For example, king will be supreme. There used to be many vassals that used to pay tribute to the king. Some of the areas were directly ruled by the center, and they were divided into provinces. Provinces were called as bhukti, and the districts were called as mandal or vishay. The provinces were ruled by governor called as uparika, and the district, the mandal or vishay, were headed by vishayapati. The task of collecting land revenue, maintaining law and order with the help of army was with uparika and vishayapati. You must have done this topic already during your study of medieval India, but so much of revision on Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty will suffice. This is from page number 2, Call of the Mosque. The mosque that has been mentioned in the article is in ruins. It's in the appalling condition. Though this is not very important from exam perspective, this is from page number 2. Call of the Begumpur Masjid that the article discusses was built in Jahan Panah. Jahan means world and Panah means refuge. So Jahan Panah means refuge of the world. Jahan Panah was the 4th city in Delhi, developed in 14th century. Before Jahan Panah, Tughlaqabad, Siri and Lal Kot were developed. After Jahan Panah, Firozabad was developed by Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Then Deen Panah and Shah Jahan developed Shah Jahanabad. Lutyens Delhi is actually the 8th and the final city of Delhi. Jahan Panah was developed by Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Muhammad bin Tughlaq was considered as a wise fool. He tried very hard as a ruler, but somehow he could not succeed. You must have heard that the technique was right, but it didn't work out. He was quite ahead of his time to come up with a fiat currency. He started introducing copper coins, but things got messed up because of poor implementation. He maintained his army quite well, and for that purpose he increased the tax. But increase in tax forced people to get out of agriculture. Some of them went for robbery and theft, and overall it started threatening food security. Sultan shifted his capital from Delhi to Daulatabad from security point of view. Threats from Mongols. But then because of water scarcity he had to come back. So he abandoned Jahan Panah. Firoz Shah Tughlaq, the 3rd Sultan of the Tughlaq dynasty, formed a new city in the Yamuna bank called as Firozabad. And then under Lodi dynasty, the capital was shifted to Agra. So Jahan Panah was altogether neglected. Later under Sher Shah Suri and Humayun, the capital was again at Agra. It came back to Delhi only in the time of Shah Jahan, but Shah Jahan then formed his own city called as Shah Jahanabad. So Begumpur Masjid that was developed in Jahan Panah was abandoned and still continues to deteriorate. But the concerned mosque was developed by the great builder of Tughlaq dynasty, Firoz Shah Tughlaq. You might have heard and read that Firoz Shah Tughlaq designed many monuments and buildings by himself. For your prelims examination, you must take care to remember this fact that he repaired the Suraj Kund, which is in present-day Firozabad. He built various public infrastructure and step wells too. Step wells back then were called as baulis. You must remember this for your exam. You must also know regarding Tughlaq architecture that they brought various Persian influence into Indo-Islamic architecture. There are certain aspects of Persian architecture that you must know, which were very heavily used by Tughlaqs and then Lodhis and by Mughals as well. One of the features is projecting gateway with arc. Another very important feature of Persian architecture is Ivans. Ivans are vaulted spaces. Vaulted means made up of series of arc. They are enclosed by wall on 3 sides and it has an opening. It's a very common feature of Persian architecture. You must have seen spaces like this. There is an entry and then on 3 sides they are closed. Generally at the center of the building, the monument, this Ivan is present. Then there are other features like double pillars. Double pillars are very closely placed 2 pillars, either at the gateway or in corridors. You would find this kind of feature of 2 closely spaced pillars. Tapering turret is another feature. Turret is a small structure at the top of the building, at the top of the pillar or beside the main dome at the top. Double domed or multi-domed roof is a very prominent feature of Persian architecture. If the dome is very large, then from below you cannot see the top. And the calligraphy or other architectural feature present in the inner wall of the dome will not be visible to a man standing below. So it is brought lower in the height so that the architectural feature is visible, without compromising the grandeur nature of the dome. So from outside, it seems large, and from inside, it seems lower in height. A tall arced pillar or any kind of big structure called as pylon is in the central portion of the monument area is also an important characteristic of Persian architecture. Gardens and fountains are yet another characteristics. Vaulted rectangular hall. Vaulted, I told you, means made up of series of arcs. And one of the most important feature is symmetry. It's very common to see in the Persian architectural style that the number of minarets, number of arcs and pillars, they are same on each side of the building. The main building and the pool are also very symmetrically placed in the mid of the garden or the architectural space. The whole design creates a mirror-like effect. There is an article on page number 10, Defined Exemptions from Data Protection Law, says the panel. Which panel? This panel is the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Data Protection. This Joint Parliamentary Committee was formed actually an year back. We'll have a holistic discussion on it, discussing the background and the basic feature of Data Protection Bill. We'll also look at some of the pointers for the prelims examination on Joint Parliamentary Committee. The discussion on privacy and personal data was going on since a long time, but it all got traction in 2017 when the Puttaswamy judgment came. In the case Puttaswamy versus Union of India, Supreme Court gave a landmark verdict. It was given by 9-judge bench. Supreme Court affirmed right to privacy as a fundamental right. Fundamental rights are fundamental to the working of the state. It has precedence over other legal rights. So naturally, if right to privacy has been declared as fundamental right, then institutional, legislative, administrative arrangements have to be made to safeguard this right. So Supreme Court in the Puttaswamy judgment itself gave a triple test. This triple test is to balance the data regulation with individual privacy. The judgment was in the context of Aadhaar case, but this triple test stands for any case where government is trying to give precedence to data regulation over individuals' privacy. Under this triple test given by the Supreme Court, if the government is trying to do data regulation and in that process if individuals' privacy is getting compromised, then three things have to be ensured. Number one, the data regulation has to be done through a law. So a law must exist for that action to be taken by the government. Number two, there has to be a legitimate state interest. Maybe the government is doing the data regulation for public good, or maybe the data regulation can become a tool for inclusion in the overall governance process. Thirdly, and this is very important, the data regulation action must pass the test of proportionality, meaning only minimalist and the necessary information has to be collected and processed. And for this to be practically implemented, you have to specify the purpose for which you are collecting or processing the data. Then only the minimalist test, the test of proportionality, can be passed. If you are collecting anything and everything, then that fails the test of proportionality. We will come back to this test of proportionality again later during the course of discussion. Even while this case was being discussed in the Supreme Court, government set up a committee under the chairmanship of Justice B.N. Sri Krishna. The purpose was to devise India's data protection framework. After a long public consultation in 2018, the committee submitted its report and it also gave a draft personal data protection bill. Then in 2019, Government of India brought the bill into the parliament with major changes. So the bill that we have in the parliament that has the basis in the draft personal data protection bill given by Justice B.N. Sri Krishna committee. But there are changes and we'll discuss those changes. And since changes were made to the draft personal data protection bill given by the committee, there were criticism coming from many quarters. And as is generally done, if the bill is of very high importance, then that is generally sent to a select committee. Joint Parliamentary Committee is also a form of select committee. So after introduction into the parliament, the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 was sent to a Joint Parliamentary Committee. The Joint Parliamentary Committee, obviously as the name suggests, has members from both Lok Sabha and Raj Sabha, but the members from Lok Sabha are always double in number compared to the members from Raj Sabha. For example, in this Joint Parliamentary Committee, there are 30 members. So 20 members are from Lok Sabha and 10 members are from Raj Sabha. So this is a brief history of the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. We'll carry out our discussion in 3 stages. In the first stage, we'll try and understand which are those features of the bill that are contested by different stakeholders, and perhaps they will become the important points of discussion in the JPC. First of all, in the 2018 draft, the one that was given by Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, that said that a copy of all personal data, all meaning all personal data gathered in India should be stored in India if it is to be transferred abroad. But sensing difficulty in ease of doing business, changes were made in the bill that was finally presented in the Parliament. And the change is that only personal data classified as sensitive or critical, that needs to be stored in India, and not all the personal data. And who will decide which personal data constitutes sensitive and critical data? That will be decided by Government of India in ad hoc manner. That has not been classified elaborately in the bill. In the draft bill given by the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, personal data may be processed if such processing is necessary for any functioning of the Parliament or any state legislature. The use and processing of personal data was very restricted. But the bill that has been finally presented in the Parliament has expanded the scope of usage of personal data. Now the personal data can be used without the consent of data principal, meaning the person to whom those personal data are related to. They are called as data principal. Now the state can use the personal data if the state is giving some kind of service or some kind of benefit to the data principal. And in that case, consent from the data principal will not be required. Now, service or benefit is very open-ended. This is not related to essential functioning of Parliament or state legislature. This is normal administrative work. Anything and everything will be covered under service or benefits. And that is why this goes against the Supreme Court ruling. As we talked about the triple test that Supreme Court gave in the Puttaswamy judgment, that the state and its authorities have to declare specific objective for gathering, collecting or processing personal data. If the objectives are not specific, then the test of proportionality will not be passed. And now things have been made open-ended. Furthermore, the power of the government to exempt government departments or government agencies have been criticized. The biggest criticism has come from Justice B.N. Sri Krishna himself. He says that this provision has the ability to turn India into Orwellian state. Orwellian state is a term that has been popularized by writer, thinker George Orwell. Orwellian state is the opposite of free state. A state where the rights of the citizens are curtailed and most of the things are controlled by the state itself. Now, why Justice B.N. Sri Krishna referred to this provision of exemption of government departments and agencies having the potential to turn India into Orwellian state? The central government can exempt any government agency from complying with the provisions of this 2019 bill. And the bill has important provisions like data principal right. Data principal, as I told you, is a person to whom the personal data is related to. And the data principal has certain rights. For example, the right to confirmation. Meaning if you are collecting the personal data, you have to take permission from him. Then the data principal will have the right for corrections. The data principal will also have the right to be forgotten. Meaning his personal data can be no more used in the public domain. But all these important provisions and all the protection of the data principal can be washed away by one stroke if the government decide that certain government departments or government agency are not liable to comply with the provisions of the bill. Then there is no meaning of these beautiful rights given to the data principal. And the purpose for which exemption can be given is very open-ended, very broad. It can be done for the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India. But it can also be done for security of the country or friendly relation with foreign states or public order, or in order to prevent the incitement or commission of any offense relating to any of the above. Here again, it fails the test of proportionality. Specific purpose have not been mentioned. They are very broad in nature, and that is why it becomes vulnerable for misuse and misinterpretation. Then there is another very important issue: the power of the government to seek access to anonymized personal data or non-personal data. The biggest question is, nobody asked about non-personal data to be regulated or to be collected by the government. In the 2018 draft given by Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, there was no question of non-personal data. But the 2019 bill has a provision that companies have to give non-personal data if called for by the government for a broad purpose like better targeting of delivery of services or formulation of evidence-based policies. Non-personal data will include data like e-commerce shopping data or the food delivery data, data related to traffic. These are non-personal data. Anonymized personal data means those will be personal data, but the personal identity will be removed from the data. So you wouldn't know whose data it is, but of course the nature of the data would be personal data. For example, the age, the sex, diseases, income. These are personal data. So there's a big debate as to why government should be seeking anonymized personal data or non-personal data from the companies. Then there are other issues. For example, in the 2018 bill, the Data Protection Authority of India, that will be the ultimate regulator for the personal data, they will have members both from the government and judicial members. But the 2019 bill that has been introduced in the parliament have members only from the government. It will be headed by the cabinet secretary, and it will have secretaries from Department of Legal Affairs, Ministry of MeitY, etc. But there will be no judicial members. There's a big question of checks and balances within the body if there are only appointees from the government. Finally, I must point it out that there is a provision of significant data fiduciary. This was not there in the original draft that was given by the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee. Fiduciary means a body that works on trust. In this case, it would also mean a body that provides security to personal data. The Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 gives power to the central government to notify any social media intermediary as significant data fiduciary. And in that case, the company will be subjected to more responsibilities with regard to audits, maintenance of records, data protection impact assessment, and other things. In this context, companies like Google, Facebook, Paytm, Twitter, they have been called by the Joint Parliamentary Committee because they, in all likelihood, will be declared as significant data fiduciary. Now let's talk about the basics of Joint Parliamentary Committee. First of all, it is a type of ad hoc committee, the kind of committee that is set up for special purpose and dissolved after the purpose is solved. The purpose of this Joint Parliamentary Committee is to look into the details of Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. How is a Joint Parliamentary Committee formed? It is formed when a motion is adopted in one house and that motion is supported or agreed upon by the other house. But it can be formed without a motion being passed in any house if the presiding officer of both the house can write to each other, communicate that such a Joint Parliamentary Committee must be formed. So it can be formed on the initiative of the presiding officers of both the house or by the motion passed by any one house and accepted by the other house. The strength of Joint Parliamentary Committee, as we have talked about, will vary from one committee to other, but always and always, Lok Sabha members are double compared to the Raj Sabha members. The power of Joint Parliamentary Committee is very wide. It can obtain evidence of experts, public bodies, associations, even of individuals, so motu or on request made by them. So calling of the chiefs of Facebook and Twitter and Google, that of course is being done so motu by the committee. If the witness fails to appear before the JPC, then the conduct constitutes a contempt of the house, not of the committee. So same punitive action can be taken as is taken for contempt of the house. And that is why in the beginning we saw that the chairman of this joint parliamentary committee is talking about coercive action against Twitter if they fail to show up next Wednesday. You must also note that the decisions in the committee is taken through simple majority voting. Decision for as to what should be done, who should be called, what should be there in the report, all major decision will be put to voting and that will be decided by simple majority. The chairman of the committee will have a casting vote to break the ties. The power of the committee is huge, but generally ministers are not summoned by the committee. But there is no restriction on summoning the minister. If the committee feels that minister needs to be summoned and questioned, then minister can be called, but permission of the speaker has to be taken. In case of any dispute, the say of the speaker will be final with regard to collection of evidence against any person or production of any document in front of the committee. Formation of JPC is not very common in Indian parliamentary system because it is formed for very important public matters. For example, it was formed for 2G spectrum case in 2011. It was also formed for VVIP chopper scam in 2013. Then in 2015, it was formed to scrutinize the land acquisition bill. Demand was there to form a JPC for citizenship amendment bill, but that was not accepted because it will be formed if a motion is passed in one house which is acceptable to the other house or the presiding chiefs of the house agrees to it. So it is formed after exorbitant amount of pressure by opposition. There are 3 more articles in today's newspaper that are important for the exam. One is the editorial article, A Scheme Before Its Time. It has been just discussed day before yesterday in the DNS. There is an article on gig economy and there is an article on PM Care Fund. This also has been discussed by me very recently. These 3 topics are important for the coming mains and the link of discussion to respective topics will be provided in the description section. Now sit back and check what you have learned. I'll read the statement and you have to tell whether it's true or false. Abdur Razak, the foreign traveler, he has referred to the Rajputs-Pratihara enmity as characteristic feature of the epoch. Well, Abdur Razak visited India in 15th century. And by then this rivalry, enmity and the tripartite conflict including Pala dynasty was over. It was actually Al-Masudi, not Abdur Razak. I hope you remember that. Statement is false. Capital of Gupta dynasty was Kanya-Kubja. The statement is false again because it was the capital of Harsha. Mihir Bhoj was the founder of Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty. Mihir Bhoj was actually one of the last ruler, the last most important and powerful ruler of Pratihara dynasty. He was not the founder. The statement is false. Mihir Bhoj built temples at Khajuraho. Well, he didn't actually. His vassal did. Not his actually, the dynasty's vassal did. It was built by Chandelas. But if the statement was that Khajuraho temples are built on Gurjara-Pratihara architecture, then the statement would have been correct. Raj Tarangini was written in Sanskrit. We have seen during the discussion that Raj Tarangini has the mention of Mihir Bhoj. It's basically a chronicle, also considered as early historical text, discussing the northwestern region of India, mostly the kings of the Kashmir region. And yes, it was written in Sanskrit. The statement is true. The first Hindu temple was built in Gupta era. See, this statement is absolutely false because Hindu temples were inspired by Buddhist architecture and already many rock-cut cave temples were built. It was during the Gupta era that stand-alone temples were started to be built. So even before Gupta era, Hindu temples were already present. The statement is false. Sanskrit poet and dramatist Rajshekhara is associated with Rajputa dynasty. We have seen that he was associated with Mahipala, who was a Gurjara-Pratihara ruler. The statement is false. In the context of medieval history, bhukti was a form of gift to priests. Bhukti were actually provinces in the medieval times administration. Statement is false. In the context of medieval history, Uparika were village headmen. Uparika were actually governors of Bhukti. They were not village headmen, they were head of provinces. Statement is false. Fiat currency was introduced by Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq. The statement is correct, but unfortunately, it didn't work out. Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq repaired many of the old monuments, such as the Suraj Kund in modern-day Faridabad. It was done by his successor, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, who was a great builder. Statement is false. In the context of medieval history, Baulis referred to a form of tax. Well, Baulis referred to step wells. Statement is incorrect. Chhatris are Persian element in Indo-Islamic architecture. As the name suggests, it sounds very desi. Well, it is part of Indo-Islamic architecture, no doubt. But this is not a Persian element. This is around 2000-year-old element in Indian architecture. It is very popular in the region of Rajasthan. So not really a Persian element, but yes, part of Indo-Islamic architecture, but the statement will be false. Export Credit Guarantee Corporation in India is wholly owned by Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Well, on the business page, there is a news regarding Export Credit Guarantee Corporation. The Cabinet Committee has given approval to list it on the stock exchange. The corporation covers the credit risk, it's kind of insurance for export. The statement given is absolutely correct. Defense Acquisition Council is headed by Union Defense Minister. This statement is absolutely correct as well. You'll find a news in today's newspaper concerning Defense Acquisition Council clearing the demand of the army to get 25 light combat helicopters. In Joint Parliamentary Committee, the Lok Sabha members are double compared to Raj Sabha. This is by convention and the statement is true. Decisions in Joint Parliamentary Committee are made through simple majority voting. This is true. It's not just by consensus. If consensus is not built, then voting happens and the chairperson has the casting vote. Statement is correct. Ministers cannot be called upon by JPC. Well, it sounds very incorrect. You must have heard, be you ever so high, the law is always above you. In fact, there is no bar on JPC to call even the Prime Minister. Now in the comment section, please tell me how much of them were you able to do. Now you have question of the day for today and answer to yesterday's question of the day. Please do what you ought to do. Goodbye. Take care.